I'm good.
Hello and welcome to IoT World Today. Recently, we conducted a survey on IoT and connectivity trends, and we learned that respondents are investing in IoT projects generally and in networking connectivity for their IoT projects specifically. Nearly 60% of respondents expect either an increase in their IoT connectivity budgets in 2021 or for their budget to stay the same. So we invited members of the Omdia research team to discuss some of these findings. So I'd like to welcome Josh Bilta, who's been with us before. He's Director of Research, IoT, and Lee Ratliff, Principal Senior Analyst for IoT and Connectivity. Guys, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
It's great to have you here. So I have a number of questions that I'd like to get to with you, and we've just been digging through the data a little bit before we started recording. So Josh, I'm going to start with you. I just referenced this data point, but it's pretty substantial. About 60% of respondents anticipate either an increase in their networking budget or for their budget to stay the same in 2021 as compared with 2020. And just 7% anticipate a decrease. So what do you make of this?
So yeah, I think as a whole, that's very encouraging. You got 6 out of 10 respondents saying, their company, their organization will increase or at least keep that networking budget flat. Indicates, I think, as a whole, a commitment to IoT is strong. It suggests, indirectly that those IoT projects are getting bigger. Perhaps we're moving from POC stage to full deployment. It would seem to indicate those projects are becoming more complex and are viewed as critical to the growth of the organization. Networking and connectivity is a fundamental element of any IoT solution. Without that, you really don't have an IoT solution. You just have a bunch of devices that aren't talking to each other. So it's an area that anyone serious about IoT really needs to invest in. I think if you look at the numbers a little closer, about 30% said their budget would increase more than 10%. So that's a pretty significant increase. We always don't know necessarily what's driving that. The question behind the question. I think obviously one thing to consider is in 2020 budgets probably were dropped. So it could be that this increase being alluded to in the survey is maybe just a return to normal levels. You certainly can't discount that with 2020 being such a strange year. So that's probably part of it for sure. But I expect a bigger piece of it, is this drive towards digitalization. Something that wasn't brought upon by COVID necessarily, but certainly been accelerated by it. And IoT we've seen in this survey and other surveys is a big part of the digitalization initiatives and efforts by these companies. And so it is good to see that being backed up by the networking investment.
Yeah, and that's a trend we talked about a bit last time with you and me and John Canali, just generally given where IoT projects had been at. Some of them were stalling, put on hold, and then we kind of saw this resurgence, certainly in certain verticals, maybe not in all. So now, Lee, I want to ask you about the benefits that respondents are talking about with networking upgrades. We see improved security at 50%, more reliable communication at 43%, reducing costs 42%. And interestingly, at least for me, only about 31% cited lower latency as a key benefit. So Lee, can you talk a little bit about some of these findings and what you think they mean for enterprises more generally?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is that the top benefits that people are looking for are related to reliability and quality and security and these kind of making the current networks better. I think that we're seeing performance-related metrics rating a little bit lower on the list, like latency. And I think that's simply because the networks they have are probably adequate for IoT. IoT applications are notoriously not demanding of network resources typically. Latency often doesn't matter, even if it stretches into seconds or minutes or even hours in some cases, just because the application is not that sensitive to it. Same with bandwidth. It's just in most applications that kind of performance is not necessary. So it's not surprising to me that that upgrades would go towards other aspects of network performance, security, and reliability, and those kind of things. So yeah, this isn't surprising to me, and especially with security at the top. 5 or 6 years ago, security seemed to be an afterthought for most IoT deployments, and we had a number of high-profile incidents like the Mirai botnet that showed that was not the way to go. Since then, we've seen corporations getting much more serious about security, even though security is not necessarily a feature that really sells itself in terms of increased efficiency or increased revenue or whatever. It is seen as kind of a insurance policy against future liability. So not surprised to see that at the top of the list.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I would completely concur with Lee. I mean, the applications that we see really requiring the type of low latency delivered maybe by 5G. Some use cases on an industrial and the factory floor, and then you talk further out, a little bit more aspirational areas like healthcare and remote surgery. But those aren't really there yet. And the majority of the deployments, the things that make up the billions of devices that we talk about when we talk about IoT today, just don't really, most of them don't need that type of latency. It might be a requirement for more applications in the future. I'm sure it will, as those applications are built, but I think that's just something that needs to be considered when you look at the results.
Mm-hmm. So on this topic of 5G, I want to dig into these results a little bit. So respondents plan on upgrading to public 5G at 34%, Wi-Fi 6, 28%, private 5G at 26%. So is this consistent with where you think enterprises are, Josh, or is 5G, Wi-Fi 6, are these still sort of in future tense for most enterprises when it comes down to it?
Yeah, I think if you look at the full results, you see a lot of technologies get chosen by the respondents. And when you talk about the billions of IoT devices that are connected, it's done by a wide range of technologies. I mean, it's wired solutions, it's wireless text, it's short range, long range, licensed and unlicensed. There's no perfect technology for so many different types of applications. I guess when I was speaking to specifically to 5G, it isn't surprising, I guess, that most plan on upgrading to 5G. The way the question is worded, that's what they plan to do. If you're planning an upgrade, you're probably going to plan to upgrade to the latest and greatest network, and 5G is that today. So I do think the reality at times could be a bit different. There's a lot of talk about 5G today. You see it on TV, see commercials, etc. But some degree, it's putting the cart before the horse, especially in terms of IoT. The 5G market is still very, very much in early days. The networks in many countries are still being rolled out. Hardware costs are still comparatively high. Standards are being finalized. So once a company actually starts deploying that network, they might look at these factors and change their decision and go with a more established network. But I would point out those concerns about 5G are temporary. A company has the long term in mind and has the capital to build a network around 5G, it probably makes sense to do so, but that's just not a majority of companies. The results also show, some companies are upgrading to low power wireless networks like NB-IoT and LTM, and for many enterprises, I think that's a more practical solution. I guess the other interesting thing is on private networks. It's kind of the same thing as 5G. There's a lot of benefits there. You gain control or security and reliability, but and private networks, I guess, technology can have benefits to enterprises, especially those like operations in remote areas like mines and seaports and power plants, things of that nature. But all those benefits come at a premium, and deploying a private 5G network is not a viable or realistic solution for a lot of companies, especially small and medium business type of companies, at least not today. So I think that certainly we look at private network deployments increasing in areas like manufacturing, and I'm sure we'll continue to see interest and trials around that. But I think the bottom line is there really is no one technology that is appropriate for all applications, and we're going to continue to see a variety used throughout IoT. And I mean, I saw one of the high results in the survey was Wi-Fi 6, which I know Lee's looked at a bit here recently.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of what you said about 5G applies equally to Wi-Fi 6. It's the latest and greatest technology, and I think people just take it for granted that when a new generation of a technology that is as common as cellular and Wi-Fi comes out, that you just automatically lockstep upgrade to the newest generation. And I think that's definitely true for enterprise networks. For IoT networks, I don't think that's necessarily true, as Josh was saying regarding 5G. And with Wi-Fi 6, the jury's still out on that a little bit. Wi-Fi 6 is definitely a high performance technology. It's really intended for infrastructure devices, APs and routers. And then as well as mobile devices, your phones and tablets and computing devices. Now, the value it brings to the IoT is in some ways a little bit more questionable, because the performance of Wi-Fi 6 is not necessary for most IoT applications. Certainly, the bulk of the volume is certainly not necessary. However, Wi-Fi 6 does have some new features that are attractive for IoT. You can actually, there's targeted wait times that allow you to put devices to sleep and wake them up when they need to communicate, and that is easily the biggest thing you can do to extend battery life, which is very important for IoT applications. Wi-Fi 6 is also designed specifically for very, very dense deployments, and in terms of mobile devices and that kind of thing, it means that if you're in an apartment building, that your Wi-Fi will interfere less with your neighbors and vice versa. In an IoT deployment, that just means that you can make it much, much more dense. The number of sensors per square foot or per 100 square foot, or however you want to measure that, can be much, much more dense with Wi-Fi 6. That being said, though, Wi-Fi 6 is a very high performance technology, is not necessarily the best choice when power consumption particularly is optimizing power consumption is your goal. So improving battery life, for instance. In that case, what we're seeing is kind of a bifurcation of the Wi-Fi market, and we're still seeing kind of a resurgence in Wi-Fi 4, and a lot of applications that should have jumped to a new node by now have stuck with Wi-Fi 4, because the performance of Wi-Fi 4 is more than adequate for really even some of the most demanding IoT applications, including video. But it's the simplicity of Wi-Fi 4 is much, much better than Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 6. And in the semiconductor world, simplicity means lower power consumption. It means lower cost. It means a lot of these things that they're just really attractive for IoT deployments. So I do expect that we will see a number of IoT applications requiring Wi-Fi 6, and some that don't require Wi-Fi 6 will be using it anyways. But for the IoT in particular, older technologies are quite often the best choice.
Okay, interesting. Well, that throws some cold water on these results. So finally, I'm going to ask both of you about this. We always talk a lot about challenges in deploying IoT projects. And we have some, familiar obstacles cited. So security concerns were at 34%, followed by budget constraints at 27%. And then connectivity and integration were also still a significant challenge for about a quarter. So I wanna ask about these. Are these kind of in line with what you see when you talk with clients? Are there things missing in this list? And what can enterprises do about it?
I mean, I think when we've done surveys like this in the past, on concerns or around IoT deployments, security is almost always the number one response, and for good reason. I would say Lee kind of touched on this earlier, but at times it has been an afterthought in IoT solution development, and that vulnerability has been exposed at times. And those concerns will continue to increase as we talk about connecting more sensitive assets and machines. And that concern should be there, and I think it won't go away, even though there is increased focus from the industry as a whole on security. I think it's never going to go away. You can never be secure enough. I think integration is another interesting one. It's a challenge for many enterprises. I mentioned the wide variety of technologies used in IoT applications. Making all those work together is tough. Integrating different platforms is tough. Integrating legacy and new systems is tough. It's all a challenge, and I think it's a key reason why we've seen the growth of the consultancy system integrator services in IoT. We did a survey ourselves earlier this year, found that 60% of enterprise adopters that are using third-party consultants to deploy their IoT solutions. IT is a big part of what these companies are offering, and we had a recent report that came out that said IoT consultancy service revenues as a whole reached about $30 billion in revenues in 2021. So this is becoming a very mainstream market. Lots of enterprises are using these consultants to bring their IoT applications to life, and really they should be. It can help with the speed and simplify the deployment process, and let those enterprise adopters really focus instead on their core business and not putting together this IoT jigsaw puzzle, which is maybe not their specialty. So I think there is, not really so many surprises in it, but it's always interesting to see some of the thoughts that we've had in the past kind of confirmed with some of the survey results.
Mm-hmm. Lee,
Yeah,
anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And like security concerns, one thing that's interesting about security is I kind of liken it to RF design in that security and RF are really specialized areas of engineering and software development. And a lot of device development, if you're an OEM and you're planning to deploy an IoT device, most of the design can be handled by the engineers that you already have on staff. You have digital engineers or software designers who are very flexible and can handle just about any challenge thrown at them.
Sure.
Security is not one of those areas. One of the cardinal rules of security is don't roll your own security. Overconfidence in your technical abilities can get you in trouble in security because it's such a specialized field that it's really best to use proven security solutions from security experts. And so that's one of the main reasons why security is always at the top of the list here. Is it's very difficult and very specialized and requires certain techniques and expertises. And then connectivity and integration, that is still very challenging. Most of the companies deploying IoT solutions don't have deep technical benches. The companies that design the solutions might, but the people who are deploying them don't. And they have to marry a lot of very different areas of technology together to make an IoT solution. And quite frankly, a lot of companies just aren't up to it. And again, that goes to where Josh was saying about professional services integrators, system integrators, who are specialists at putting these things together. So yeah, these challenges very much in line with what we've seen in the past and what we hear companies talking about.
Well, I want to thank you gentlemen so much for joining me today. This is time number 2 for Josh, time number 1 for Lee, but it's really been it's always a pleasure to have you
It's fun.
join us.
Yeah.
And we have another survey that Lee's taking a look at, so we're going to be fielding that hopefully soon, and then we'll have more to talk about in the realm of embedded AI. So I look forward to joining you gentlemen in another such discussion in the future.
Likewise.
Should be great. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you guys. And until next time, you can always check out IoT World Today for more on IoT and connectivity. And thanks so much for joining us.